The SUV flew into the air like a launched toy from a slingshot, wheels spinning helplessly, before crashing sideways into the HOA's meticulously arranged flower display. Petunias exploded in every direction, and Karen's horrified scream echoed through the cul-de-sac like a banshee's final curse. The neighborhood froze as if gravity itself took a break to witness karma in slow motion. 5 seconds earlier, she had arrogantly gunned her engine and barked, "You don't own this driveway, nerd boy." 5 seconds later, her luxury vehicle was dangling at an angle like a misplaced Lego block in a sandbox of justice. And me, I just sipped my coffee and whispered to no one in particular. I warned her. It had started 3 weeks earlier, with nothing more than some tire marks and an uninvited SUV blocking my garage. My name's Jack Moresby and I work from home as a mechanical systems designer, mostly for security and defense contracts. In other words, I like my peace. I'd bought my house specifically because the long driveway and detached garage let me tinker in quiet isolation. My office faced the driveway so I could watch the world roll by without ever having to engage unless I chose to. That illusion shattered the day Karen moved in next door. She arrived like a tornado wrapped in leopard print and entitlement. Within 24 hours she had knocked on my door to ask if I planned to cut my already freshly trimmed hedge. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Then came the complaints about my garage lights being too bright, the smell of solder coming from my workshop, and the fact that I didn't attend HOA meetings. I didn't even know we had an HOA until Karen introduced herself as the new president. Things escalated when she began using my driveway as her own private shortcut to bypass the circular street loop. At first I thought it was an accident. Maybe her GPS was buggy. But no, after the third time I saw her drive right through without slowing down. I walked out and waved. She rolled down her window, smiled, and said, "Hope you don't mind, saves me a minute or two." I stood there blinking as she drove off like I was some background character in her personal video game. I tried reasoning with her the next day. Told her politely that the driveway was on my property and I didn't appreciate her using it without asking. She laughed. Laughed like I had just told her she owed me rent for breathing air. "Oh, come on, it's just a slab of cement. You don't even use the front half. Besides, I'm the HOA president now. I could technically make it community access if I wanted." That set off alarms in my head. I wasn't one for conflict, but I also wasn't someone to be pushed around. I reviewed my property survey and confirmed the obvious: the driveway was fully deeded to me. No easement. No community clause. Still, I figured she'd come to her senses. Instead, I woke up the next morning to find a red sticker on my mailbox citing me for obstruction of community flow. Not signed by the city, not official, just a generic template with a fake HOA letterhead. I went over to her place, and she opened the door before I even knocked, like she'd been waiting. "Oh, good, you got the notice. Maybe next time you'll cooperate." I told her flat out to stay off my property. Her smile evaporated. She leaned in close and whispered, "And what exactly are you gonna do, Jack? Build a robot to chase me off?" That's when I made the decision. I was going to build something. Not to chase her off. To stop her cold. See, I had access to prototype schematics from a past project involving retractable vehicle barriers. The kind used at embassies and research facilities. Silent when down, invisible to most eyes, but capable of stopping a truck mid-charge. I never thought I'd install one on a suburban driveway, but here we were. That weekend I faked a backyard barbecue to mask the sound of construction. My buddy Caleb came over to help pour the concrete and set the hydraulic supports beneath carefully designed pavement tiles. The mechanism was pressure-sensitive but also controllable by my phone. It had multiple settings: warning mode, delay, lift, and emergency intercept. I left it on standby, but added one final feature: a motion-activated camera linked to a time-stamped log. 2 days later she struck again. Karen blew through my driveway just as I was testing the camera feed. I watched in perfect HD as her SUV drifted a little just to make the turn more dramatic, then zoomed off like she owned the block. That's when I activated warning mode. A soft blue LED would now blink every time the sensor picked up her vehicle. She saw it on her next run and stopped halfway through. Got out, walked right up to the tile area, and tapped her foot like she was inspecting my property. She actually squatted and tried to lift one of the decorative stones with her manicured hands. When it didn't budge, she stood up, dusted herself off, and shouted, "This is harassment. You don't scare me, Jack." The next day she did the unthinkable. She called 911 and claimed there was a medical emergency that required access through my driveway. I only found out because a fire truck showed up and asked me politely to open my gate. Of course I let them through. But guess who followed them? In Karen in her SUV, waving like a homecoming queen and holding what looked like a bag of groceries. I reported her misuse of emergency services that afternoon. Still, the HOA backed her. She rallied her allies, claimed I was building illegal obstructions, and spread rumors about me having paranoid delusions. They tried to call an emergency meeting to vote on a new easement clause. I wasn't invited, but I sent them a polite cease and desist letter along with my property survey map and a photo of the no trespassing sign I'd installed on the driveway fence post. When Karen tore that sign off the next morning and chucked it into my rose bushes, I activated emergency intercept mode. I knew she'd come back. People like her always return. They have to prove they're right, that their version of the world wins. And so when she came roaring up my drive at 7 a.m. on a Thursday in full speed, muttering something into her Bluetooth headset about filing harassment charges and turning my garage into a community gym, the hydraulic plate snapped upward. Her front tires hit it like a ramp. The force launched her vehicle just enough to get airborne, tilt sideways, and land in a comedic thud across her own HOA-maintained flowerbed. Her screams were instant and unfiltered. The neighborhood emerged from doorways like curious meerkats, and phones came out before the dust had even settled. I didn't say a word, just walked to the edge of my porch and sipped my coffee as she stumbled out of her SUV, mascara running and fury unleashed. It was all recorded. Every sensor trigger, every second of trespass. The trap had been set and she drove right into it. But this was only the beginning. Because Karen was about to double down. And I was just getting warmed up. The morning after the hydraulic launch incident, my doorbell rang at 6:32 a.m. sharp. Not a minute earlier, not a minute later. That alone told me exactly who it was. I opened the door with zero urgency and found Karen standing on my porch, her hair still damp from what I could only guess was a very rushed shower. Her SUV, still skewed and battered, had been towed back to her driveway overnight. I didn't have to ask how. I'd seen the blinking hazard lights flashing just past the edge of my front lawn at 2 in the morning. Now here she was, glaring at me like I'd vandalized a national monument. Before I could say a word, she hissed, "You're going to jail. That thing you built, it's a death trap. It's assault. And I've already called the police." I didn't flinch. I stepped outside, closing the door gently behind me. "Karen," I said, "you trespassed. Repeatedly. You were warned. You ignored posted signage. You destroyed property, and now you're mad that the driveway defended itself." She puffed up like a balloon someone had overinflated with rage. "You think this is a game, Jack? I am the president of the HOA. You think you can just install a robot weapon on your property without permission?" Her voice cracked on the word weapon, like she was hoping the label alone would be enough to scare me. I didn't bite. I told her calmly that the system was entirely legal under both city and state codes, and that it had never activated unless a trespasser ignored warnings and crossed the sensors. I mentioned the multiple logs, video footage, and the time-stamped warnings I had both printed and emailed to the HOA. She was not interested in facts. She was interested in power. "You're going to be sued," she snapped. "I'll make sure your little fortress gets torn apart brick by brick." And then she stomped off with the posture of someone who thought slamming her feet down counted as a legal threat. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. She was convinced she was already winning. By noon that day, I had received a letter on fake HOA letterhead, again unsigned, informing me that I was under formal violation review for installing a hazardous device that endangered community members. The funniest part was that it was slid under my door, not mailed or emailed. Like some teenager trying to sneak a breakup note. Attached was a grainy photo of Karen's SUV midair, with the caption, "Evidence of malicious obstruction." I laughed. The irony was thick enough to swim in. My camera had caught the exact same moment, except in 4K and with audio. You could even hear her yell, "I'll show you who owns this driveway." That alone would make any judge raise an eyebrow. Still, I wasn't about to let this spiral without proper structure. So I compiled a full report. Footage, logs, email threads, even a notarized copy of my property survey. Then I reached out to an attorney I'd worked with during a product liability case years ago. His name was Greg Turley, a blunt, no-nonsense guy who knew HOA manipulation when he saw it. After looking through my materials, he gave me one sentence. "Jack, if they come at you, we'll countersue so hard they'll forget how to spell property line." I liked Greg. The next day was the emergency HOA meeting Karen had somehow scheduled without notifying half the residents, including me. But I found out through a neighbor who'd seen a mention on the community Facebook page. That was her style: build her army in whispers and stage her power moves when no one had time to prepare. I decided to attend anyway. Not to argue, just to observe. The meeting was held at the community clubhouse, a beige stucco building that smelled like folding chairs and mild mildew. Karen was already standing near the podium with a smug smile, flanked by 3 of her loyal board members, all of whom looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The moment I walked in, the room shifted. Conversations paused. Karen's smile twitched like she hadn't expected me to show up. "Jack Moresby," she said, her voice artificially sweet. "So glad you could join us. Today we'll be discussing dangerous modifications to personal property that violate safety standard." I sat down in the back row without responding. For the next 20 minutes, she ran through a carefully crafted presentation. Photos of her SUV, dramatic quotes pulled from the HOA rulebook, most taken wildly out of context, and then a clip of the hydraulic gate activating, cropped and looped to make it look like a weaponized booby trap. She was good, I had to admit. But she was also sloppy. She skipped over dates, omitted the sign warnings, and conveniently forgot to mention that she had ignored repeated notices not to trespass. When she finished, she turned to the board and said, "I propose we vote to demand removal of the system and fine Mr. Moresby for endangerment and community disruption." Before anyone could speak, I raised my hand. Karen's smile faded again. I said nothing, just walked to the front of the room, pulled a small USB from my pocket, and plugged it into the projector. What followed was a compilation I'd prepared the night before, unedited, time-stamped footage of every trespass Karen had made. Every warning, every ignored sign, her yelling, her mockery, the 911 stunt, the moment she ripped down my no trespassing sign, and finally, the infamous SUV launch, this time complete with her yelling just before impact. By the end, the room was silent. The kind of silence that only occurs when people realize they've been backing the wrong horse. Karen tried to speak, but it was over. One board member quietly stood and said, "Maybe we should delay the vote until we gather more information." Another cleared his throat and added, "We didn't realize the full context." I looked at Karen. She looked back like she wanted to leap across the table and scratch my face off. She didn't say another word. The meeting ended in awkward shuffling and weak apologies. Outside, one of the residents clapped me on the back and whispered, "That video needs to be on YouTube." That night, I uploaded the footage anonymously to a popular subreddit, r/EntitledPeople. Titled it "HOA President Trespasses Repeatedly Then Gets Launched by Hidden Hydraulic Barrier." It exploded. Within 12 hours, it hit the front page. By the next day, reaction videos were everywhere. Streamers laughing, legal analysts dissecting the footage, and even an engineer breaking down my mechanism and calling it a thing of beauty. I didn't speak publicly. I didn't need to. The footage did all the talking. Karen tried to fight back. Filed a report with the local police claiming I'd built a military-grade assault machine. But the officer assigned to the case came to my door, watched the footage, and left shaking his head. Said it was the most satisfying case of justified force he'd seen all year. The department filed no charges. Instead, they opened an inquiry into Karen's misuse of emergency calls and the fake notices she'd distributed on non-HOA letterhead. Things started to unravel for her after that. Rumors spread fast in our neighborhood, and Karen was the epicenter of a Category 5 gossip hurricane. By the end of the week, 2 of her board allies resigned. Another neighbor told me quietly that several members were planning to call for her removal. It was happening faster than I expected. But Karen wasn't done. Not yet. She was cornered, yes. Exposed, humiliated, and rapidly losing allies. But she still had one trick left. A legal one. One that would try to turn everything around and drag me into a courtroom. I could see it in her eyes the last time we crossed paths. This wasn't just about driveways anymore. It was about revenge. She was going to fight dirty. And I was ready for it. 3 days after the viral explosion, I got served. A neatly dressed process server rang my bell with the kind of tight-lipped smile that said he'd done this 100 times. He handed me a thick manila envelope and said with dry professionalism, "You've been named in a civil suit by Karen R. Mansfield on behalf of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association." Then he turned and walked off without another word. I already knew what this was about, but I sat down at my kitchen table, opened the packet, and let the pages confirm everything. Karen was suing me for property damage, emotional distress, reckless endangerment, and something laughable called driveway weaponization. She had even itemized the damage to her SUV down to the cost of a lost air freshener. It was absurd. But it was also real. I could no longer treat this like some neighborhood drama with a few viral laughs. Karen had pulled me into a courtroom battle where she'd twist reality, quote irrelevant laws, and cry crocodile tears if she had to. But I wasn't worried. I had Greg, my attorney, who read through the documents that afternoon and said, "I've seen nastier lawsuits from raccoons in abandoned apartments." Still, we knew that lawsuits didn't hinge on what was right. They hinged on what could be proven. So we dug in. Karen's case was padded with fluff and exaggerations. She included statements from 3 of her remaining allies on the HOA board. One claimed they'd feared for their lives when visiting the neighborhood because of my driveway. Another said my hydraulic system was a militarized deterrent that created an atmosphere of intimidation. The third, perhaps most desperate, described my camera setup as a privacy violation akin to espionage. Greg laughed when he read that one. "Jack, apparently your ring cam is now the NSA." We spent the next week preparing the counterclaim. Not just a defense, an offensive. Greg wanted to go beyond proving my innocence. He wanted to drag the HOA's dirty laundry into the open, especially Karen's misuse of power, fabricated notices, and manipulation of public safety systems. And more importantly, he wanted to prove that Karen had personally damaged my property multiple times and used her HOA position as a weapon. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was buzzing. People stopped me while I checked the mail, gave thumbs-ups from driveways, even dropped off homemade cookies. Turns out Karen had made a lot of enemies over the years and people were finally seeing her for who she really was. I didn't say much, just nodded and thanked them. But quietly, I was gathering statements. Neighbors who had seen her speeding through the community, who received fake violations, or who had felt bullied into voting her way. Every one of those statements went into a file that Greg labeled ammo. Then came the day of the court appearance. It wasn't a full trial, just a preliminary hearing to present both sides and determine if the case had merit. But Karen showed up like she was the star of a legal drama. She wore an expensive-looking navy suit and arrived with a lawyer who looked just as smug as she did. She didn't glance my way once. But I caught her muttering to her attorney with a sour smirk as they looked over at me. I just sat back and waited. The judge, a calm older woman with tired eyes, opened the session. Karen's attorney began with a flowery speech about community trust, safety, and the so-called terror my booby-trapped driveway had instilled in innocent residents. He called it reckless and vindictive. He described Karen as a woman just trying to serve her community who was now the victim of high-tech vigilantism. Then he played the edited version of the security footage, carefully trimmed to remove her trespassing and threats, showing only the launch and her screaming afterward. Then Greg stood. He didn't raise his voice or use fancy language. He simply asked the judge if he could play the unedited footage. When the judge nodded, Greg wheeled over a monitor and hit play. Karen's smirk vanished the moment her own voice filled the courtroom, loud and clear, saying things like, "You don't own this road and I'll drive where I please." Then came the clips of her destroying the sign, laughing at my warnings, and most damning of all, using the phrase, "Maybe I'll just file a fake emergency to get through again." The judge didn't react much, but I noticed the tiniest shift in her brow. Greg then laid out the legal ownership of the property, the warnings sent, and a full explanation of how the hydraulic system worked, activated only in violation of a boundary and designed for safety. He even referenced existing laws on defensive deterrence on private property. Karen's lawyer tried to object, saying it was excessive, but the judge overruled him. At the end of the hearing, the judge asked one simple question. Did the HOA ever pass a formal vote, legally registered, to grant itself access to Mr. Moresby's property? Karen's lawyer stammered. Karen blurted out, "Well, we didn't need to vote, I'm the president." That was the final nail. The judge called a recess and 15 minutes later, returned with her decision. The court dismissed Karen's claim due to lack of evidence, established that the hydraulic system was lawful, and scheduled a separate hearing for my countersuit against both Karen and the HOA for defamation and property interference. Karen stood there stunned, her mouth open slightly like a puppet waiting for a string pull. Her lawyer whispered something to her, but she didn't move. She didn't even blink as I walked past her on the way out. Greg patted my shoulder and said, "Get ready, because the fun's about to start." This is where we flipped the story. Over the next 2 weeks, Greg filed official discovery motions that pried open the guts of the HOA's inner workings. What we found was a treasure trove of dysfunction. Karen had misallocated funds, approved non-existent repairs, and repeatedly forged signatures to pass her own motions. Her private messages, recovered by subpoena, showed a pattern of harassment and manipulation. She called one neighbor a prune-faced slug and referred to me as the garage goblin. She even joked about finding a way to remove me from the neighborhood entirely. We compiled every document, every screenshot, and every witness willing to testify. At the same time, the subreddit continued to explode with theories, memes, and support. One guy even animated the SUV launch like a video game cutscene. I didn't interact with any of it directly, but it gave me a strange sense of satisfaction. What had started as a petty driveway feud was now a public story of entitlement unraveling in real time. Karen responded by doubling down. She sent an open letter to the neighborhood accusing me of weaponizing the internet against her. She framed herself as a community servant under siege. But nobody bought it. By now, most residents had seen the footage and read the court's dismissal. They knew who was lying and who had simply drawn a boundary and defended it. Eventually, the HOA board held a closed-door session, without Karen, and began planning an internal vote for leadership removal. One of the members, a quiet man named Victor, reached out and thanked me. He said Karen had threatened to fine him for putting up a pride flag and once accused his teen son of stealing mail because he wore a hoodie. He said people had been too scared to speak up until now. Karen didn't know it yet, but her final chapter as president was about to be written without her. While she prepared to appeal the court's dismissal, the neighborhood was preparing to throw her out. She thought she still had control, but the foundations were cracking beneath her feet. And unlike a hydraulic gate, These brakes weren't going to stop her SUV. They were going to bulldoze her reign of petty tyranny completely. The neighborhood meeting was called quietly, almost secretively, as if the whole block had conspired to conduct a silent coup. It wasn't advertised on the HOA website, and there were no paper flyers. Instead, whispers carried the message: back fences, mailbox corners, dog-walking routes, and muttered exchanges during morning coffee. The once silent victims of Karen's HOA rule had found their voice, and that voice was saying enough. The clubhouse lights flickered on at dusk, and one by one, people showed up, not for potluck or bingo, but for the reckoning that had been brewing since the first time Karen slapped a violation on someone's trash bins for being 3 inches too visible. I wasn't going to go. I had no intention of being the centerpiece again. But Victor, the board member who'd been threatened over a flag, showed up at my garage with 2 folding chairs and said, "You've got to be there. She'll try something." He was right. Karen had a history of twisting facts when no one was watching. If this was the endgame, I wanted to see it with my own eyes. When I arrived, the clubhouse was already half full. The air buzzed with quiet conversation. People looked around like they couldn't believe they were all here, all in agreement, all done with being steamrolled. Karen stood at the front, acting like nothing had changed. She wore a tight red blazer and a look of rehearsed confidence. Her smile was too wide, her posture too rigid. You could tell she was forcing every inch of her composure. But under that facade, I saw the cracks. She knew. This wasn't her audience anymore. She started with her usual charm, welcoming everyone, talking about unity and vision. Then she pivoted into what she called the recent driveway incident, making herself sound like a misunderstood hero caught in the gears of a technological mishap. She called the viral footage misleading, and said it had been manipulated to damage her reputation. She gestured vaguely toward me but didn't name me, as if I was Voldemort and uttering my name would seal her fate. Then Victor stood up. No one had asked him to. He just rose from his chair and turned to the room. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried because of its honesty. He said he'd been quiet for too long, that he'd let Karen's behavior slide because he didn't want drama, but that line had been crossed months ago. He told them about the threats, the intimidation, the times Karen overruled board votes and claimed executive privilege. He described the secret emails and the fake fines. And then he said something that stuck with everyone. This isn't about a driveway anymore. It's about dignity. It's about the kind of place we want this to be. One by one, others stood. Some told stories. A retiree talked about being fined for feeding bird. A single mother said Karen threatened to call CPS when her kids chalked on the sidewalk. A man from 2 streets over shared how Karen accused him of running an unlicensed business just because he sold woodcrafts from his garage. The stories tumbled out like floodwaters behind a broken dam. All of them painted the same picture: power abused, rules bent, fear imposed. Karen tried to respond. She held up her hands, said this was all a misunderstanding, that she had only ever acted in the interest of the community. She brought up bylaws and procedures, tried to read from a printed manual. But no one was listening anymore. The room had already made its decision. Then someone from the back, an older woman I'd never seen speak at a meeting before, asked the question everyone had been waiting for. "Can we vote tonight?" Karen froze. For a moment she looked like she might say no, invoke some obscure rule to stall. But Victor pulled out a folder and read from the HOA charter itself. Emergency removal votes could be called by the board under special circumstances. This was one of them. The board passed around paper ballots while Karen stood motionless, lips tight, hands clasped in front of her like she was praying for the numbers to save her. The vote wasn't close. Out of the 47 households represented that night, 39 voted for removal. 5 abstained. 3 supported her. 3. She looked at that paper like it had betrayed her. Then she finally turned to me and, for the first time, addressed me directly. "You think you've won, don't you?" she said, voice low and sharp. "You and your little machines." This was never about the driveway. You humiliated me. You ruined my life. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The room already had. The board formally announced her removal and appointed an interim president, Victor. Karen didn't wait for the gavel. She stormed out, heels clicking like gunfire on the tile. The door slammed shut behind her, echoing louder than any speech she could have made. But the story didn't end there. That night, as I was loading up my car with some electronics for testing, a sleek black SUV pulled slowly past my house. Not her old one, the one she wrecked, but a rental. She rolled down the window, stared for a beat too long, and then drove off. I knew that look. It wasn't over for her. Not in her mind. And she was right about one thing. It wasn't just about the driveway. It was about everything. About standing up when the world expects you to sit down. About drawing lines and defending them. About not letting people rewrite the rules just because they shout the loudest. In the following days, the neighborhood changed. The new HOA leadership began rolling back the dumbest of Karen's regulations. People smiled more, waved more. Someone even painted a little mural on the community park wall, showing a cartoon SUV mid-flight with the words consequences below it. I wasn't the hero. I was just the guy who said no at the right time, with the right tools, and didn't flinch when things got messy. Karen, meanwhile, went quiet. Rumor had it she tried to appeal the board vote but was denied. Her name was scrubbed from the HOA roster. Her remaining allies retreated back into their houses, quiet as moths with burned wings. Online, the video kept growing. I didn't check it often, but every time I did, the view count had jumped by thousands. People from other countries commented. Someone translated it into German. Another guy built a miniature replica of my hydraulic system using Legos and put it on TikTok. I got one letter in the mail without a return address. Inside was a single sentence typed on plain paper. You're lucky I didn't press criminal charges. I didn't need a signature to know who sent it. I didn't reply. What Karen hadn't realized, what people like her never do, is that power doesn't come from titles or fake fines or HOA handbooks. It comes from people deciding they won't be stepped on. And once that decision is made, there's no going back. By the end of the month, her house went up for sale. The listing agent tried to talk it up as a quiet suburban dream, conveniently omitting the part where its former owner had been launched into internet infamy. I watched from my driveway the day the moving truck came. Karen didn't look at me. She didn't wave. She just got in the passenger seat of the rental car and left. No speech. No drama. Just gone. But I kept the hydraulic gate. Not because I needed it anymore, but because it had become a symbol, a quiet reminder that boundaries matter, and sometimes they need to rise up fast and hard. It had been 3 quiet months since Karen left the neighborhood, and for the first time in a long time, peace felt like more than just a temporary truce. The air seemed lighter. Kids played chalk games on the sidewalks again without fear of being reprimanded, and the new HOA president, Victor, actually walked door to door asking residents what they wanted changed. He even suggested dissolving a few of the more ridiculous rules that Karen had enforced, including the infamous bin placement policy and the holiday light schedule. People laughed about the old days now, but not the bitter, anxious kind of laugh they used to have when Karen ruled. This time it was genuine, cleansing, the kind of laugh that finally lets go. I thought I was done with all of it. The drama, the court hearings, the video that refused to stop climbing in views. I'd moved on to new projects in my workshop, things I actually cared about. I was designing a compact electric winch system for a client in Montana and experimenting with water recycling pumps for a greenhouse prototype. It was finally quiet again, until the envelope arrived. It was slipped under my door, just like Karen used to do with her fake notices, but this one didn't have any HOA logo. No return address. No stamps. Just my name typed on the front in large bold letters. I opened it cautiously, expecting maybe some leftover threat from her allies. Inside was a single sheet of printer paper and a flash drive. The paper read, "Thought you'd want to see this before it goes viral again." Her voice hasn't changed. The message didn't make sense at first. Then I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. What played was raw footage from a parking lot camera, grainy but clear enough. Karen. The same Karen. This time she was screaming at an airport gate agent about being denied an upgrade to first class. I recognized her voice instantly. I said, "I have status, do you understand? I am not sitting in the back with children and animals." She shoved her ticket toward the agent and pointed at a man in military uniform nearby. "Why is he up there and I'm not? What did he do? Fight in a war?" The agent didn't reply. The footage cut off. I stared at the screen. Then I played it again, just to make sure it wasn't some kind of sick deepfake. It wasn't. It was Karen, unhinged, undeterred, and clearly still chasing her imagined throne. She hadn't changed. She'd simply found a new stage. I didn't upload the video. Someone else did a day later. Maybe the anonymous sender. It hit a few million views in under 24 hours and ended up stitched into compilations titled "Former HOA President Gets Karma at Airport." The comments were brutal. Most of them referenced the flying SUV video. I guess once the internet pegs you as a villain, it's hard to undo. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. Watching her unravel in front of strangers was more exhausting than satisfying. That part of my life felt distant now, like something I'd read in a book I didn't want to reread. But the truth was, her behavior had left something behind. Not just in me but in the entire community. Even after she left, people were cautious. They walked lighter. They hesitated to speak up. It was like her presence still lingered in the air, ghostly and judgmental. So I decided to do something symbolic. Not dramatic, not viral. Just something small to mark the new era. I upgraded the hydraulic gate. Not to launch vehicles anymore, but to rise slowly and flash a message across a new digital panel I installed. It read, "Private property. Respect is free." I didn't advertise it. I didn't film it. But anyone passing by could see it, and they did. More than once, neighbors stopped and smiled. One kid even said, "Mr. Jack, that's so cool, like a Transformers driveway." I laughed. It was simple, but it meant something. The final lawsuit wrapped up a few weeks later. Karen's appeal was rejected without hearing. The judge said the original evidence was not only sufficient but damning. She ordered Karen to pay a portion of my legal fees, which I doubted I'd ever see, but the point wasn't the money. The point was that for once, someone like her didn't get away with it. There was no quiet settlement. No behind-the-scenes manipulation. Just consequences. Victor invited me to a community barbecue not long after, said it was part of his new, Normal Neighbors initiative. I went, mostly out of curiosity. The grill was smoky, the lemonade too sweet, and someone had brought a karaoke machine. But the vibe was completely different from the old HOA events Karen used to stage. People joked. They relaxed. They teased each other about lawn heights and dog poop bags, but with warmth, not fear. I even talked to a couple of the former board members who had once backed Karen. They admitted they'd felt bullied into compliance. One said, "She made us think we were protecting the neighborhood, but really we were just protecting her ego." I stayed late that night, watching the sun dip behind the rooftop. The same driveways, the same houses, the same fences, but everything felt less tense. I realized then that peace doesn't just happen. It's built. Slowly, carefully, like a device with too many moving parts. One gear gets stuck, and the whole system grinds down. But if you repair the broken pieces, sometimes it works even better than before. A month later, a young couple moved into Karen's old house. No drama. No ridiculous rules. Just two people starting fresh. I dropped off a welcome basket. Bread, wine, a printed neighborhood map, and a note that read, "If anyone ever tells you the HOA owns your driveway, call me first." They laughed and invited me in. Their toddler ran around the empty living room barefoot, dragging a stuffed dog behind him. For the first time, that house didn't feel haunted. That night, I looked back at the security footage archive. Not to dwell, just to clean house. I deleted most of them. The angry standoffs, the fake citations, the car launch, gone. I kept one clip though. The moment after the SUV landed, when Karen climbed out, stunned and silent. I didn't keep it because it was funny. I kept it because it reminded me how far things had come. That clip was the turning point, not just for her, but for all of us. I never saw Karen again. She vanished like a storm that had blown through and lost its strength. But sometimes, late at night when the wind hits the trees just right, I imagine her somewhere far away, glaring at another driveway, still believing the world owes her the fast lane. I hope, maybe, she learned something. But if not, that's okay. Because I did. And as for the hydraulic gate? It still works flawlessly. But it hasn't had to rise in weeks. Maybe that's the best kind of victory, the kind that never has to flex again. It just exists, quietly powerful, ready only if absolutely necessary. The real win isn't the launch or the video views. It's the stillness that follows. The calm. The clear message that boundaries matter, and respect is the only key that opens every gate.